Hello and welcome into another episode of Locked On Wolves. Today on the show, unpacking the Naz Reid conundrum and really reasons why the Wolves should not bring back Naz Reid if the price is indeed what it looks like it's going to be. Why Naz Reid probably won't be on the Minnesota Timberwolves next year. We'll break it all down on the show. Welcome in. You are Locked On Wolves.
You are Locked On Timberwolves, your daily Minnesota Timberwolves podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Wolves podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Ben Beecken. I'm the host of Locked On Wolves. Today's episode is brought to us by our friends at Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Happy Tuesday, everybody, and welcome into the show. A big thank you, first of all, for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every single day. This show is free and available everywhere. That includes YouTube, as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. Wherever you like to listen to podcasts, you can find Locked On Wolves. You can also find Locked On Wolves and all of the other Minnesota Locked On podcasts over on Roku and Amazon Fire TV. Just download the Locked On Sports Minnesota app. More great local sports coverage 24/7 and for free. Download the Locked On Sports Minnesota app today on Roku and Amazon Fire TV. You can also follow on Twitter at Locked On T-Wolves and also at my account, which is at Beecken. That's with two B's, two E's, C-K-E-N. All right. Today I want to spend some time talking about Naz Reid. And of course, we did the season review for Naz. His was a couple of weeks ago now. I think I did about a half show on Naz Reid, kind of unpacking the season as a whole. But now I want to build something of a case as to why, and I said why, in the open, I said why I don't think he'll be on the team. I think it's really more why I don't think he should be on the team. I mean, he might be. There's still a real chance Naz Reid is back. I'm leaning, and I said this on Monday's show, on the heels of the conversation I had with Howard back for Friday's show last week, based on what Howard said, based on some of the interest Naz had back at the trade deadline in February, I'm leaning towards it's less likely he's back with the Wolves. And I want to build the case for why he shouldn't be. And I like Naz Reid. And I feel like I have to say all these things. I like Naz Reid. This isn't a Naz Reid attack. I think he's very, very good. I think he's one of the best backup bigs in the entire league. And I think he will be a serviceable starter for somebody next year. I think he's best cast as a really good third big. Can play the 5, can play a little bit of the 4. He's improved defensively. He's improved on the glass. He can stretch the floor. He can pass really well, but he still has holes in his game. And I'm afraid that Naz Reid will be paid as though those holes in his game are smaller or fewer or farther between. And that's not how I feel about Naz Reid. Naz Reid at $2.8 million or whatever he was making this year in the fourth year of his initial undrafted rookie free agent deal was an absolute unequivocal steal bargain. He deserves all of the praise he's gotten for this season. If the Wolves could bring him back for $10 million, I'd say absolutely. It'd be a fantastic third big at $10 million, at $12 million a year. For, even a little more than that, probably. But we heard back in February that the Timberwolves were offering him an extension, reportedly. Some local folks, I think Dane Moore had this on his show. There were some others that reported the Wolves were offering somewhere between 10 and 12 million a year. So call it 4 years, 12 million at the high end. So 48 million over 4 years. Naz was seeking at least 50 million. And I don't know if the gap was actually that small. My guess is it was a little bit greater. My guess is the Wolves offered something that ramped up or ramped down to or from 12. It was probably something like 4 years, 46, 47. Naz probably wanted at least 50, more than that, likely. And now, and we heard at the time there were teams willing to trade for him, but of course, being an unrestricted free agent this summer, they were teams that, as part of the negotiations, were saying like, hey, we're not going to pony up for a guy that could walk in the summer. Of course, we know, like say Boston or Denver, two teams we know were interested and apparently still are. They could have traded for him and then chosen to extend him at whatever he's going to get this summer. So I bet Boston was thinking, hey, we can land Naz Reid. We'll play the rest of this year if he fits. We'll extend him and we won't have to pay him as much as we would in unrestricted free agency this summer. So they were willing to give something up at the deadline. But the Wolves, unless they were getting something significant, what was in it for them? Because the Wolves were trying to make their own run. And Karl-Anthony Towns was injured at the trade deadline. Rudy Gobert wasn't having a fantastic season. Of course, Naz ends up breaking his wrist anyway, but that was kind of the calculus at the time. Like, why would we go out of our way to trade him? And now this offseason, any of the 30 teams in the league have a chance to sign Naz Reid. And he's going to get paid. Howard Beck said on Friday's show, if you missed it, go check that out. It posted last Friday, and a wide-ranging conversation. We talked a lot about Towns trade possibilities. Actually, a lot of the show was about that. We talked a little about Tim Connolly's future. We talked about reaction to the season, but we also spent a few minutes talking about Naz Reid. And Howard said that he poked around on Naz and found out that several teams were interested. He's going to get at least $15 million a year. So call that 4 years and $15 million, give or take. That's $60 million over 4 years. Quick math for you. $60 million. That is more than the 46, 47, 48 the Wolves were offering at the deadline. Almost certainly more than what the Wolves will pay him, and absolutely more than what I would pay him. And I know everybody loves Naz Reid. I know and Marnie Gellner, who was on the show all year, thinks Naz is one of the great. She said this on the air during our show, that he was one of the nicest guys on the team, one of the nicest people she's met in this business. And everybody pulls for Naz Reid. Great story, undrafted guy, remade his body, works hard. Everybody loves him. So this is not a reflection on Naz as a person or anything like that. I want to be really overly clear about this, probably more than I need to. But I would not pay him $50 million a year to be, I haven't even brought up the fact that you've got Rudy Gobert and you got Karl-Anthony Towns, and they play the same position as Naz Reid. And you're paying supermax money to these guys, and Cat's number jumps to $36 million next year and $50 million the year after that. You can't tie up another $15 million to a guy who plays the same position. And the idea of Naz Reid playing some four is really more of an idea than actuality. It's really not all that practical. And I want to spend most of the show today kind of breaking down the numbers and explaining why that is. Naz played some pretty limited minutes at the four this year, and they were, how shall we say, much less successful than Karl-Anthony Towns minutes at the four this season. Now, Naz was very successful. It varies maybe a little strong. He was quite successful as a five when Rudy was off the floor. Was a really good, I would even call him a small ball center. Even though his natural position is center, he's undersized. So when the Wolves play Naz at the five, and anybody else, Jaden McDaniels, which he didn't play much for this year, but Taurean Prince, any of those guys at the four, you're playing small because Naz is undersized. He's smaller than Towns. He's obviously smaller than Rudy Gobert. Naz was successful at the five this year. But guess what? Rudy Gobert and Karl-Anthony Towns are also at their best when playing the five. Rudy only plays the five, and Cat is still at his best when he's playing the five with Rudy off the floor. And maybe that changes. Hopefully it changes, because the Wolves are relying on that changing moving forward. If they're betting on this trade from last summer working out in some way, shape, or form. But now you've got three guys who play their best at the five, and they have very little positional flexibility. And that in and of itself would be the simplest way to explain why Naz doesn't make sense to bring back, especially not at that price point. There's a reason why 10 months ago, I was arguing to trade Naz Reid. I'm not going to run from that. I spent much of last offseason saying, if you can get a couple of seconds for Naz, maybe somebody even ponies up a first. You do it, because you already have two guys that play center. Naz hasn't shown the ability to successfully play the four. I wanted the Wolves to get a little more creative with the four spot. And you don't need a third center who isn't a great rebounder. Clearly, if the Wolves didn't have Naz Reid last year, they maybe wouldn't have even made the play-in, right? I mean, they would have been a couple games worse. So I was wrong about that. But the premise of what I said a year ago wasn't wrong. You can't have three centers and expect them to get regular minutes. Remember, Naz Reid was a DNP CD regularly in October, like half the time. He just wasn't part of the rotation. That changed because of the Towns injury, and because even before the Towns injury, it started to change because when he saw the floor, he played very well, and the foul trouble, et cetera. Like, obviously, you need some depth, but at $2.5 million or whatever he made this year, 2.8, $3 million, fine. At $15 million, no, you can't sign somebody who may not play any given night, and instead, every now and again plays 12 minutes if somebody's in foul trouble. Like, we saw very few games with the three of them on the floor together, Gobert, Towns, and Naz. All right, I want to get into some of the numbers, the two-man lineups, the five-man lineups that include Naz Reid, and also I really have a couple big points to make. when explaining why why Naz does not make sense to bring back at whatever it ends up costing in the open market. We're going to do all that here next. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our title sponsor of the show. That's our friends at Game Time. I am guilty of waiting to the last minute of buying tickets for a variety of things, certainly sporting events, also concerts, occasionally comedy shows. It's a bad habit, but Game Time can help you out if you are in the same boat as me. Buying tickets to your favorite events should not be stressful. Game Time is the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all the sports, music, comedy, and theater near you. Game Time is the place for last-minute ticket deals. Forget planning months in advance. Game Time is deals on tickets right up to the day of the event. It is a lifesaver for people like me. Get exclusive flash deals on tickets for football, basketball, baseball, concerts, comedy, theater, and more. The Game Time guarantee means that you always get the best price. If you find tickets in the same section in a row for less, Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. Snag your tickets without the stress with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code Locked On NBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem the code Locked On NBA for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. A big thank you once again to those of you that do make Locked On Wolves your first listen every single day. Of course, every day is the rest of this week. We got a ton coming up. We are daily, Monday through Friday. That's what we do all off season, all the way through free agency through July. We're daily. So make sure to follow and subscribe to the show wherever you listen to podcasts. And we'll see you back here again tomorrow on Wednesday. All right, let's continue the Naz Reid conversation. I want to take this. I want to start with lineup data because I think this is an important point to make. And then we'll get into some play types and things that, like, it's not a direct Towns-Naz comparison, but that's part of this conversation. Why? Well, because Rudy Gobert is still your starting center, and Karl-Anthony Towns is your backup center. So if you're going to justify paying Naz Reid anything more than $10, $11 million a year, which you'd have to do to keep him, again, don't forget that, you have to be able to convince yourself he could play the 4 at the NBA level with some volume of minutes, right? Not spot duty, because he did that this year, and the spot duty didn't go all that great. And obviously things can change if you get a higher volume of minutes, but there's not a whole lot in Naz's track record in the data that suggests that he's viable as a 4 moving forward. He's best cast as a 5. This year, according to Basketball Reference, Naz Reid spent 16% of his minutes, 1/6 at the power forward. So not a ton of time, 84% of his minutes at center, whereas Cat spent 2/3 of his minutes, almost exactly at power forward, and only 1/3 of his minutes, 35% at center, which is, of course, completely different from what we've seen the rest of Karl-Anthony Towns' career. So Cat's already playing heavier minutes at the 4, and I want to actually bring that comparison back up here in a minute. Let's actually, before we get to that, talk about some of the lineup data. I jumped ahead a little bit. Rudy Gobert lineup data. 2-player lineups with Rudy Gobert. Rudy and Cat were a very modest, plus 0.6 net rating, the two of them together on the floor, in 529 minutes. Now, Rudy and Cat only played 27 games together, and obviously played heavy minutes because they started together in, I believe, all 27 of those games. Naz and Rudy were effectively healthy for the entire season at the same time until the end of the year when Cat was healthy, Naz was out. But they only actually shared the floor in 31 games and only played 199 minutes together, which is less than half of what Cat and Rudy did. So it's a very painfully small sample size, but it's all we have to go off of. And if you're investing in Naz Reid, you have to be confident that he can play alongside Rudy Gobert. And I don't think we can say that. In those 199 minutes, they were a minus 12.7, which was his second worst plus-minus mark, or net rating mark, I should say, next to his pairing with Nickeil Alexander-Walker, which surprised me, by the way, the Alexander-Walker one. Former teammates in Utah as well. But in 199 minutes, again, Naz and Rudy together, a minus 12.7. Cat and Rudy together, a plus 0.6. Again, not a, like, you don't feel great about the 0.6, right? Like, obviously. But it's better than negative 12.7. Now for Naz, I mean, that was talking about Rudy. For Naz, he only had one positive net rating 2-man pairing. Now there's other there's noise here, right? We're going to get into some 5-man here because 2-man lineups do have some noise to them, right? Because, like, if, for instance, Naz is only positive plus minus for minutes of any volume, taking out Garza, Minot, and Matt Ryan, was Jordan McLaughlin. I mean, those guys played together a bunch, but, like, you go on the list, his other, like, a lot of the other guys that Naz played together with were bench guys. You're a bench guy for a reason in general, right? And I'm very much generalizing at a high level here, but there is some noise here, right? If you play all your minutes with somebody that's on the bench, that's generally going to hurt your net rating as a pairing. But the only positive net rating that Naz Reid had was Jordan McLaughlin. And I mean, I say that about Naz playing with the bench a ton, but, like, he still started 11 games this year. He was a regular rotation guy. Once Cat got hurt, he never, like, lost that role, right? So he still played relatively significant minutes with good players. Naz, and I already mentioned the Naz and Rudy number, a minus 12.7. The only number that Naz had that was worse than that on his 2-man list is Mike Conley. They only played 116 minutes together. That was a minus 18.1. Like a horrific number in 116 minutes. Again, small sample size, but not great. Naz and Cat together, they only played 85 minutes together this season. It was a minus 7.3. And again, everybody was a minus with Naz except for Jordan McLaughlin. So that paints a little bit of a picture about Naz this season. We can also look at the 5-man lineup data. So if you go ahead and look at 5-man lineups with Naz Reid in them, there's only, what do we have here? 23 lineups that he played, that Naz Reid was in 5-man lineups that had greater than 10 minutes. So really 11 or more minutes played. Only 23 lineups. So I know the minutes, like, it sounds weird that I'm going by 11 minutes or more, but remember, these are 5-man lineups. These are entire units. So, like, for instance, we could do it this way. The lineup he played the most minutes with, he played 95 minutes total with a 5-man lineup that included, Naz was at the 5, Jaden McDaniels at the, well, actually, Kyle Anderson at the 4, McDaniels at the 3, Ant and D'Lo. And they were a plus 4.4. I mean, that was, for a stretch, a starting lineup for the Wolves, right? They started 18 times with that lineup. If you go by net rating, every single one of his best lineups, he's at center, right? And again, he only played 16% of his minutes this year at the 4. But every one of his best lineups, he's at center. There's no exceptions here. In 31 minutes, which actually was his 4th most used lineup, Naz actually had a plus 44 with this lineup. This is a weird one. Austin Rivers at point guard, Jalen Noel, Jaden McDaniels at the 3, or actually, no, Anthony Edwards at the 3, McDaniels at the 4, and Naz Reid at the 5. So a very small ball lineup. Well, I say that. I guess your guards are Rivers and Noel, but still a small ball lineup with McDaniels at the 4 and Edwards at the 3, and you're a plus 44 in 31 minutes. But that goes to show you, like, some of these other lineups, like Taurean Prince is in his next, like, 4 best lineups. Naz doesn't have any positive lineups with regular starters until you get to, like, his 5th and 6th best lineups. That's when D'Lo and Ant are more regularly in there. Actually, Ant's in pretty much all of them. That's when D'Lo's more regularly in there, and other guys that started a bunch. You got a lot of Noel. You've got a lot of Taurean Prince. You got some Nate Knight mixed in there with some of his best lineups, weirdly enough. But Naz and Ant together were in a lot of successful lineups. It really speaks more to the rotations and the players that Naz was playing with, and I think it tells a big story about Naz Reid. And I also should point out, some of these lineups, the defensive ratings were actually really impressive. A handful of these, like that lineup I mentioned a minute ago with Rivers and Noel, that had a defensive rating of 85.7. So, and again, this is all with him at the 5. It's not with him at the 4. Naz at the 4 can work offensively because he can dribble, he can pass, he can shoot a little from the perimeter. We know that. But the defense is the bigger concern. How does Naz hold up on the perimeter? And I said this earlier, he's improved. He's a bit more nimble. He's reshaped his body over the past couple of years. He's far better defensively, and you could get away with him at the 4 for stretches, but he isn't going to play there regularly. And the numbers for him this season are just not that impressive. And it's easy to lose sight of that because he had some gaudy raw numbers, in a couple of games here and there. And he helped keep the Wolves afloat for a stretch. He had some really big games, and he was kind of a revelation at times. And the jelly fam stuff, the layups, the finger rolls, the passing, the dribbling from a guy his size is so much fun, but it obscures what some of the numbers tell us about his season. And I actually do want to do want to do a bit of a Naz Cat comparison. I don't think anyone out there is arguing that Naz Reid's a better player than Karl-Anthony Towns, but I want to point out some of the key areas of difference and just how stark it actually is. Because, again, if you're bringing Naz Reid back, he has to be able to fill the Cat role. Or, I mentioned this, and there's another reason why I want to go here. Howard and I talked about this on Friday. If the Wolves do trade Karl-Anthony Towns, say they agree for a trade on draft night, they trade him when free agency opens, whatever that might be, like, are they thinking of Naz as a potential backup plan? You pay Naz $16 million, and instead of paying Cat 36 and 50 and whatever it goes up to the next few years, and you try to backfill some of that production with Naz Reid. But how much of that production are you actually backfilling? If Naz's minute volume increases, does his production stay the same? So I want to dig into that a bit here next. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our friends over at Prize Picks. Every day of the NBA playoffs and all the way through the finals, the next couple of weeks here, next few weeks, I guess, one Prize Picks user will receive a chance at becoming a millionaire. One entry placed after 8 a.m. Eastern at 7 a.m. Central will be randomly selected each day. Whoever placed that entry will be given a 6-pick flex with the following payouts. 6 correct picks gets you $1 million. 5 correct picks, $80,000. 4 correct picks, $16,000. Full details can be found at prizepicks.com/million. You must opt in at that link to be eligible for the $1 million entry. Again, prizepicks.com/million. Once you opt in, all you have to do is play the game like normal, and you could be the lucky winner. If you're not familiar with Prize Picks, it's really easy to play. You just pick 2 to 6 players on really any sport, and if they'll score more or less than their Prize Picks projection or fill in, other category stat column here, you win up to 25 times your money on any entry. Again, any sport. So, of course, the NBA, NHL playoffs ongoing, Stanley Cup playoffs, baseball, of course, college sports, etc. You can find it there on Prize Picks. Make your entry in less than 60 seconds. You can download the Prize Picks app or go to prizepicks.com to sign up and play daily fantasy sports. First-time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with the promo code Locked On. If you deposit $100, Prize Picks will give you $100. If you deposit $50, they'll give you $50. Don't forget to enter the promo code Locked On at sign up for an instant deposit match up to $100. All right, a bit more on Naz Reid. So a straight Naz Reid Karl-Anthony Towns comparison is not fair for a number of reasons, but I think it's important to kind of put into some perspective. This is a fairly quick and dirty comparison of these guys in a number of different ways. Like, for instance, and also, by the way, I'm talking about this year Karl-Anthony Towns. So Karl-Anthony Towns' worst season, and obviously the injuries, he played, 29 games. We talked about this last week on the season review, but this is Towns' worst overall season. So that's what I'm using. I'm not using like his all-star year last year or his best season a couple of years ago offensively. Like, we're talking, like, I'm going to look at the B-ball index numbers from this season, 22-23, when Cat was a little underwhelming, frankly, when he was on the floor, and a variety of factors, yes. But let's start here. Playmaking numbers. Like, we think of Naz Reid, and I guess I'm generalizing here, but like Wolves fans think of Naz Reid as like a really impressive playmaker for a big, and he can pass the ball extremely well. Like, that's one of the things he's good at. And I think also is kind of, it appears that much more impressive because of his size, and just like the ball looks like a Nerf ball in his hand, right? It has a bit of that different effect than it does with Towns. And Towns has this reputation the past several years of his career of like these crazy cross-court passes. Remember, I think it was last year he got into the softball pass thing where he'd be like in the post on one side of the floor. He'd underhand like softball pitch it to the opposite corner, like this weird all over the shoulder, behind the head stuff. So, like, yeah, he turned it over too much. But guess what? Karl-Anthony Towns' playmaking numbers are through the roof better than Naz Reid. Through the roof better. Assist points per 75 possessions. Karl-Anthony Towns had a B+ this season, according to our friends at B-Ball Index. And I guess I'll give the quick definition. That's total points from assists per 75 possessions. So how many points per 75 possessions are your assists leading to? Karl-Anthony Towns, a B+, 80th percentile. Naz Reid, 38th percentile, D+. 5.3 points per 75 possessions. Cat, more than twice that 11.8 points per possession. We could go on down the list. I'm not going to list every single one. Role adjusted assist points per 75 possessions, which that attempts to show performance relative to the expectation based on others in the same role. So the question that it seeks to answer, according to B-Ball Index, is, are they a good passer for their role? So that's a really relevant one here when we're talking about bigs. Naz, a minus 0.23, 56th percentile, a C plus according to B-Ball Index. Karl-Anthony Towns, 94th percentile, grades out as an A, a plus 6.34. And on and on and on down the list. Passing versatility, Karl-Anthony Towns, an A plus. An A plus in passing versatility. Naz Reid, a D, 32nd percentile. Towns, 100th percentile. That's passing data on assists from scoring play types. Basically, are you a well-rounded passer is what that attempts to answer. Karl-Anthony Towns, yes. I know that he makes dumb passes. He commits a lot of turnovers. But think about it. How many of those are offensive fouls versus, and obviously they count the same, except for, I guess, live ball turnovers are worse. And, a lot of that's, turnovers when you're passing the ball more likely is a live ball turnover than some of the offensive foul stuff. Well, it always is compared to an offensive foul. All that to say, Naz, look at his playmaking grid on B-Ball Index. It's all C's and D's and a couple of F's. That's what it is. There's one A minus in there, scoring gravity, excuse me. Karl-Anthony Towns, all A's and B's. There's one F related to passing efficiency, which does have to do with bad pass turnover rate. Everything else, though, is a B plus and greater. B pluses, A minuses, A's, and A pluses, one F related to passing efficiency. Naz Reid also, by the way, had an F in passing efficiency. His were all D's and F's except for one A minus and one B plus. Like, not close. Playmaking. And that's one thing, but the playmaking column. We talk about rebounding, which his rebounding has dipped significantly the last couple of years. It's pretty similar, though. Very, very similar. And in fact, Cat has a slight edge. Defensive rebounds per 75 possessions, rebounds per game, rebound chances per 75 possessions. That stuff Cat's got a better mark on than Naz Reid does. And if you look at Naz's last year, Naz improved a lot this year. It wouldn't even be close. So 12 months ago, we'd be talking about Cat having a much greater edge there. The other one I'll hit real quick here is play types, offensive play types. And Naz has turned into a really impressive face-up scorer, taking guys off the dribble. There's a lot to like about what Naz Reid did this year in that regard. But Karl-Anthony Towns is still absolutely phenomenal in all these different categories. Naz, pick and roll man, was an A minus, 87th percentile. Karl-Anthony Towns, 88th percentile, A minus, essentially the same there. Post up though, which is less frequent than it ever used to be. But Naz Reid post ups, not a good proposition for the Wolves. He was 17th percentile in post-up points per possession, 0.84 points per possession. That's an F, according to B-Ball Index. Karl-Anthony Towns, post-up points per possession, 0.92, 89th percentile, and A minus. Again, frequency is low. In fact, according to NBA.com, I went and looked over there. Towns would post up on over 11% of his possessions this season. Naz was only 7.3%. Still, besides Rudy, the two highest on the team in terms of frequency. And by the way, I know this is something Jim Peterson talked about on Wolves broadcast this year. Rudy's points per possession on post-ups is actually really good. There's other factors there, but Rudy was actually the best in terms of points per possession on the Wolves roster. But post-ups, playmaking, Towns has a really significant edge. We're not talking about a slight edge. He's got a slight edge in terms of rebounding, significant edge in playmaking, in post-ups, in slight edge in pick and roll man, like some of these different things. It's just not close. Towns is a significantly better player. And I don't think I'm creating a straw man here, because this is a question the Wolves have to answer for themselves when it comes to Naz's next contract and a potential Karl-Anthony Towns trade. I know you're not necessarily picking one or the other, but if you keep Naz and you keep Towns, he has to play the Towns role in a good chunk of his minutes, assuming you're keeping Rudy Gobert. If you trade Towns, Naz becomes one of the best bigs available to try and backfill some of that production at a fraction of the cost compared to what Towns' outgoing salary is. So I think it's absolutely a relevant conversation. And I think it's fair to have this discussion at this time. All right. That's all we got for you today. Plenty more to get to this week. Again, daily, Monday through Friday. So we'll be back again tomorrow on Wednesday. A big thank you to those of you that do make Locked On Wolves your first listen each and every day. This show is free and available everywhere, including YouTube, as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. You can watch on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on both Roku and Amazon Fire TV. You can also follow us on Twitter. That's at Locked On T Wolves. Don't forget the T, and also at Beecken with 2 B's, 2 E's, CKEN. This show, of course, is part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Remember, the Locked On Network is your local experts on all the biggest stories. Once again, I'm Ben Beecken. This is the Locked On Wolves podcast, and we'll catch you next time.